All right, so hello and welcome. Today's session is with Nora McCook, who is from Bloomfield College, and she'll be talking about engaging wacky data, evaluating an ePortfolio initiative launched during the pandemic. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to you, Nora, and get us started.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Helen. So I'm just going to, before I click on too many things, put in the chat a link, tiny URL link, which should take you to a Google document that has hopefully all shared correctly, a link to a Jamboard, the slides that I'm going to use today, and an infographic that I did with Canva. So 3 things there you can access hopefully through that link, but let me know if that's not the case. All right, so I'm going to just pull up slides here. Is that something you all are seeing now? Okay, perfect. So yes, the title, I actually waited quite a while before actually looking at the definition of wacky, and which tends to have a little bit of a humor connotation to it and like a lighthearted connotation to it. I kind of like that position towards the data we found and the situation I'll kind of describe, but you know, it's perhaps not the optimal word for the kind of data, but we have quirky data. We have some data that I've been really struggling to pinpoint exactly if this is just us, the way that we did ePortfolios, the way things, the Bloomfield College way, or how much of this is, and I think that I was in a session just before this from institutions that have worked with the ePortfolio Institute, you know, how much of this is really kind of a little more widespread. So that's kind of one of the tensions that I invite you all to think through with me here. And I do very much welcome thoughts either just jotted in the chat or the Jamboard or emailing afterwards, just anything that seems to kind of fit for you between those two. And I know those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So I'll talk more about those things. But I do want to just give a shout out here and at the end, which always gets very rushed, but to 2 folks who have been really instrumental in helping me do this data, Professor Zachary Ayadala here at Bloomfield, and my current student intern, Kelsey Doherty. All right, so I believe I've given you all the handout link, but let me know if I need to pop that in the chat again. I will say, I think somebody in the beginning mentioned they were also recovering from COVID, and COVID took most of my month this month. And the slides are not yet, they do not yet have alt text on them, but that's something I plan to do. So if you do want to just reach out to me, I'm happy to give you an update to say the slides that you have a link to now have the alt text assigned to them. So please let me know, or if there's any other accessibility needs, please do email me about that. I want to acknowledge that. So, so the 2 takeaways I have for this session very much are going to involve each other and all of us. So I proposed this session as an opportunity to reflect on multiple changes in higher education and how that's impacting learners and certainly our implementation of ePortfolios and assessing ePortfolios, which the latter for us has actually been harder than the former. And then thinking about ways we might strategize or creatively respond to these types of challenges. Let's see a couple things in the chat. Oh, thank you, Helen. So I've done the thing where my closed captioning notice is hiding my chat text out. Okay, cool. All right, so I do have 5 areas, but I will, you know, be very happy to change up pacing and kind of dwell on some of these, speed past some of these. So very, very happy to be flexible. So I do very much welcome any thoughts and input. And you know, Helen, feel free to just like unmute if my screen loses the notification about the chat. So I'll do a little introduction. We kind of did a little introduction at the beginning from some of you, but I'll invite you guys to hop into the chat as well. So Bloomfield College is a 4-year private undergraduate school full of master's degrees. We're a minority serving institution. And so we are both PBI, predominantly Black, and also HSI, Hispanic serving. And we are kind of around 1,600 students now, which, you know, at a healthy enrollment, we might have been 2,000. So our enrollment is part of our story right now. So I do invite you all to let us know in the chat a couple of kind of, you know, where you're coming up from ePortfolios. If you want to do your name, I know it's sometimes redundant with Zoom chats, but your institution type, are you 4-year, 2-year, private, public? Are you predominantly white institution, HBCU, any of those types of things you want to share, and any other kind of basic, you know, descriptor demographic of your institution. And then in what program or other areas are you currently implementing ePortfolios? So I'm curious to see who all we have here. So private comprehensive. Ooh, pretty good. Initially in gen ed. Enrollment 7,000 for the first one, planning to use ePortfolio for new gen ed program. Right. Our other Michigan person, primarily undergraduate, implementing ePortfolios in liberal arts courses and for the certificate program. Southern Illinois University, 4-year public PWI, piloting ePortfolios in community-oriented digital engagement scholars program, a new alternative gen ed pathway for students from underserved groups. Wow, that's really good. Southern Oregon, 4-year public, working on gen ed, IUPUI public. SCU, English and engineering. Oh, this is great. Thank you all. Scottsdale Community College, Arizona, beginning pilot. Probably going to experience wacky data collection from 9 project. Very interested. Okay. Gen ed classes. Hey, lovely, lovely. SLCC, ePortfolio manager, and they have the big ePortfolio. So all gen ed courses. Awesome, folks. It's great to have you all. And I love the diversity of both where we're implementing ePortfolios and also the spaces that we're coming from. So I have one more question. And if this, you want to put this in the chat, that's great. I did have a space for this in the Jamboard as well, if you've already found yourself there and don't want to click back over. So either place is great. But I'm curious about what if you have any like kind of wacky data stories or wacky data experiences. If you have any data that, you know, in one way it might be, is there data you wish you had that you don't? I find that that's probably the bigger story about this, is how much data I don't have access to implementing ePortfolios. And then what findings do you have that are tricky to act upon? So either kind of way, or you kind of get the gist of like, what have you learned about ePortfolios? What have you not been able to learn about ePortfolios through data? So I'm really eager to hear your thoughts with that. And so while you're thinking about that, and feel free to, you know, add that later on as well. I'll just show you all what the Jamboard looks like. So this is an alternative space here. Again, I am excited to have a conversation about these things with you all, and I'm very happy to pause and hear from you all, unmuted or otherwise. So I have a couple of the boards set up here, and if you're haven't used Jamboard in a while or haven't used it, the very top is the navigation where you can go to different frames. So I have 5 frames, and so you can kind of click through to see the questions. And so these are just questions I'll sort of pull up occasionally throughout the presentation, but so feel free to jump in and add comments to these pages at any point. So the last one is going to be just open question and comment. So if any of these strike you as something based on what I say, based on what you came here for, please feel free to add. And yes, somebody's already found. A really good way to add, and I have this little guidance here on each of the frames, is just to come over here on the left and go down 4 to where it says sticky note, and it'll pull up a sticky note. You can change the color. You can type and then click save. All right, and that'll be one of the ways you can join in here. All right, so I do see one comment here, so I'm going to go ahead and read that one. So we are wanting to use ePortfolios primarily for student support and success. Not sure what data we are going to need yet. Yeah, Absolutely. I was absolutely in that boat when we started off. So, all right. So with all of that, I'll give you a little bit of like the saga of ePortfolios at Bloomfield College. And again, this is kind of thinking a little bit about like some of this is us. We put ourselves in this position, not ePortfolios, but Bloomfield. And some of this is certainly larger undercurrents going on in higher education and in the nation. So obviously, a lot of us got a notice in not your first year, hopefully, of ePortfolios, in our first year of ePortfolios, which was, of course, that we were going to be remote for the entire year. The year we decided to launch ePortfolios with our first year students. And so we were, scrambling a bit to make this happen. And then thought we kind of had a handle on it, thought we were going to revise things. And then in our second year of ePortfolio, our college announced it did not have the funds to continue for this year, 22 to 23, this upcoming year. So that, certainly cast a different light on what we've done. And so we thought, sure, we can think about this, we can navigate this. Faculty administrators are very distracted. And then we get another wrench, which is that we are now in accreditation probation for noncompliance for financial well-being, which was not surprising, as well as assessment. So this was the kind of first one that really seemed to be like, okay, opportunity for ePortfolio here. But again, this is something that we are like currently in the midst of right now is this official probation period. We are also looking at a potential, hopefully likely merger with Montclair State University nearby, which is a public university. And so we are hoping to, over the next 1 to 2 years, become a little bit more on firmer grounds with Montclair State. So that is a lot going on, and has tracked like kind of the first of the crises tracked with the beginning of ePortfolio. So we have been navigating so much institutionally that ePortfolios have kind of been in a little bit of a bubble. I actually decided to really go hard on ePortfolios at my institution because in the spring of 2020, I was able to go to the AACNU annual meeting for the first time and participated in the digital forum there. Learned all about ePortfolio, all about institutional change with ePortfolio. I was really excited about it. In hindsight, this assumption that I started ePortfolios with was probably a little bit narrow. And I've since read, Gambino and Enion's Catalyst framework for high impact ePortfolio practice. And so there are certainly drawbacks to this approach, but I also see that it has some roots in the exigency that Bloomfield College was facing. And I suspect that there are other precarious institutions that are going through some of those things on the list I just shared with you. So I really started ePortfolio thinking, we'll build it and we'll show it to people, and then we will just be there as an ePortfolio team to support all of the instructors beyond the first year who would like to implement ePortfolios. And again, we didn't expect quite as many wrenches thrown into our college as we encountered. So this approach didn't fly quite as high as it might have looked like at the beginning. But I kind of want to, thinking about wacky and thinking about how that actually has a bit of a positive connotation, I kind of want to think about the frame here of whether, this kind of approach of a very minimal rollout of ePortfolio that was designed to really be responsive to other people's uptake, whether that might actually have some justice implications. I'm especially thinking about Paulo Freire and for my own specific use, Bob Broad in writing studies. So I've hesitantly called this this little mini reflection here, a possible justice-oriented design as a framework for ePortfolio launch. And so these two terms, process and product, are so ingrained in me, coming from writing studies. But I also did a lot of my research on cross-cultural language and literacy work that was inspired by Paulo Freire's problem-posing education. And so I think I just automatically leaned towards the processes, and lean towards, we'll get an ePortfolio template, sure. We'll collect some data, we'll do some workshops. But the point of that was that this was going to be a reciprocal process. The first thing that we put out wasn't going to be great. It was always going to be improved with that recursiveness, that iteration. So when we started this, I think really kind of leaned on the process here. And I do I think about one specific example of when we put out the first ePortfolio in fall 2020. I hated the assignments that the first year seminar was planning on using on the ePortfolio. They were going to have students put a resume and a cover letter for a job that they were looking for, which sounds like a perfectly fine assignment. I do that assignment in professional writing, but didn't feel like the right, especially for a very first semester student, the right thing to put on their ePortfolio. We ultimately changed that, but those changes have been supported by ePortfolio, and have been supported in doing some really strange data work that I'm going to talk about. So I kind of think about this a little bit again, like, yeah, we launched ePortfolios, maybe without I can certainly see without like the full like Catalyst framework that we might have done. But what we have done is worked kind of with the faculty and the courses that we have. So of course, ABLE's theme and questions this year are really thinking about justice. They're thinking about how ePortfolio designs can and should be justice oriented, how applying an effective implementation framework using stakeholders approaches for ePortfolios can empower all members of our community, and then authentic assessment strategies, how they might center marginalized voices for a variety of purposes. And then I really kind of look through this and see how prominent assessment is in all of these. So if ABLE is asking us to consider justice and inclusion and centering marginalized voices, so much of that is kind of relying on thinking about assessment. And so our approach to assessment has really been kind of hit or miss. And I believe that, planning a very basic ePortfolio and then hoping to collaborate with lots of stakeholders really was undermined by a lot of the change that subsequently happened. Like the state, I think a lot of people talked about, initiative fatigue, change fatigue. That was just like high octane at Bloomfield College. But I also kind of want to point out that I have personally struggled with not having access to a lot of high quality data collection and analysis. So we are using Google Sites. So everything I want to know about data, about our ePortfolio, a student worker has to sit and count and tell me who did an ePortfolio. So we have done other types of data collection I'll talk about, but I have had a really hard time getting our statisticians, getting institutional research. Like people are just like really elsewhere right now. So the data we've actually collected has kind of been hampered itself by and the analysis I've been able to do by some of these things that I think are happening because of higher education, and also at a smaller institution. So I do think there are some justice access issues there that I do think we should think about when you're thinking about data. So I've talked a lot. So I do want to like check in on the Jamboard, especially seeing if we have anything. But if you would like to think about anything related to those themes of justice, I've put those questions from the slide that I got right from Abel into the Jamboard on that second page. So I'm going to start with the chat and then look back. So reluctance on behalf of faculty and students to respond to surveys, trying to figure out what everyone else is doing. Yes, participation across the board has been a huge issue, and especially like when I see that from about like stakeholder engagement, I will tell you how many times we've failed to try to get our stakeholders on board. Great, we've got the Gambino and Onions piece, and yes, that's the data I want. How do we capture healing, transformation, empowering experiences for students? Amazing, amazing. And I can't think of anywhere better than ePortfolio to do just that. Check out back over here. Let's see if we have anything yet. I'm sure we haven't quite gotten to these questions just yet. But please feel free if there's anything now or later. Please feel free to chime in on the Jamboard. So some of our challenges, our pivots, and our data collection efforts, like somebody said in the chat, participation. We have tried 3 times to have student focus groups. 0 students have signed up. We had a workshop series last fall, and other than our kickoff event, we had 1 or 2 students come to the workshops, which was going to be kind of how we were checking in about ePortfolios, throughout that fall. We've had, turnover, career center, everything going on with our institution. We've had turnover in institutional research, and then just generally, this is kind of, I feel like, a hard time to address a culture of reflection and assessment, just because of everything going on, other than the fact that we are now facing accreditation issues related to assessment. However, low faculty interest, low uptake by our assessment coordinator. I still haven't fully convinced the assessment coordinator that ePortfolios are really valuable for assessment. So with everything else going on, I still want to make that pitch to them, and I infiltrated the assessment committee to try to do that. So a couple of the pivots that we've done is try to find some money, try to lure students. Ironically, the only people that have ever been paid to do ePortfolios are these 2 student interns, because there was an outside grant that we were able to pay them with. But one thing we did do when we failed with our attempts at focus groups, we actually decided to implement something inspired by Bob Broad's dynamic criteria mapping. This was last summer, where we, it's a fancy word for just like doing some coding of ePortfolios. And so if we couldn't get students even asynchronously at a table, we decided to at least use the voices that we had, which were their ePortfolios. So we started coding that. And we actually, we presented at Able last year, and I was like pulling my hair out because we had terrible findings. Like we basically had really poor results. But that, to me, after doing this so many times, is because like we had a really rich process of engaging with that ePortfolio data and coding it. And the biggest takeaway I had was that our first year seminar coordinator changed his mind about what went on that first year seminar ePortfolio page, because he started to see that what students were talking about with their dreams and goals was so much bigger than a resume and a cover letter type assignment. And so that's, that fed right back into a better ePortfolio for that semester. But in terms of, I didn't know this at the time we proposed to present, but we really didn't have much to actually present last year. But that was our attempt at trying to do co-designing work at ePortfolio when we absolutely could not get students in the room to help us. So we have paid a couple of student interns, and they have been huge. And then we, instead of doing workshops, we started to do these pop-up booths on campus. And so right before our spring symposium this past year, we did a couple of days a week for 2 weeks, asking about ePortfolios in the cafeteria right outside of the student center, in the main academic hall, and in the library. And so we had about 40 different students come in and just, ask us about their ePortfolios. And so that was like, tremendous turnout compared to some other things that on campus. So the main assessments that we've been able to do, really in the first year, we were really kind of doing some basic usability, right? So portfolios from usable, acceptable, beneficial. And so we did counts with the student intern of our students using the first year seminar page, the writing page. Are they personalizing their homepage? We looked at surveys from students and instructors. Are they satisfied? Do they understand the purpose? Do they value the portfolio? And then we got our institutional research to give us data on a subset of our students, everybody in a first year seminar, and whether they were still at the college. So we started to look at that retention correlation. We were able to tell some good stories. We were able to talk about, any higher percent of students in second year doing the ePortfolios. In the survey questions, those sense of, do you value the ePortfolio? Do you understand the ePortfolio? That improved between 1 year and 2. And then the positive correlation with retention and strengthened in the second year. And then actually, because of our student intern, we administered a sense of belonging questionnaire. And we found, the positive story, we'll talk about the wacky story, but what the positive story was that we did find improved our higher ratings for their sense of belonging for first generation students in particular between the first and the second year. We also implemented a ePortfolio showcase in the second year. And again, when we every time we did something other than an in-person workshop, we got some good participation in the workshops. So I'm going to talk through the infographic for a second here that kind of pulls all of this together in a little bit more of a timeline format. And so this is on the handout if you would like to see a link to that. I found that Canva doesn't let me zoom, so I had to just do screenshots of this. But this is kind of the graphic takeaway for our Bloomfield College ePortfolio story. So again, like I said, things were looking pretty good in spring 2020. It seemed like a pretty good time to do ePortfolios. We were doing strategic planning. I had a course release to implement ePortfolios in the fall. We had a cross-campus team assembled. We got accepted into the ePortfolio Institute from AAC&U. And then pretty immediately, it all kind of went out under the rug. So the Institute itself moved from the summer to the spring of 2021, which meant I needed to actually put the ePortfolio together before the Institute. And then, so obviously everything with remote learning and all of that as well. So, as I said, I've kind of created a pretty basic ePortfolio. I kind of just asked what from our 3 first year courses we were targeting, writing, first year seminar, and a first year creative arts and technology, what assignments do you currently do that you'd like to put on the ePortfolio? And then that's basically how we launched it. I created a template in Google Sites and we were up and running. Our plan was first year will be our first year courses. Second year will be for second year students. Third year, we'll sort of switch to a little bit more of a professional ePortfolio or kind of a showcase ePortfolio. And we'll expect to have third year students at that point, et cetera. We even got a new assessment coordinator kind of at that time. So, we were rolling with some of these punches so far. The first set of feedback we got was survey data. And strangely, our writing instructors were the ones that filled out the survey data. Not strangely, I'm not surprised, but so we have really positive, feedback from our instructors, but none of the first year seminar instructors actually filled out the survey, which is the flag. And then, our students, certainly there's selection bias in participating in an ePortfolio survey. But they were fairly positive about it in the very first year. But they were kind of like, I'm not sure who's like reading this or ePortfolio. I'm not quite sure. Like, can I send this to a job, to an employer? So they were a little, they were asking good questions about what it was for. And so we were like, great, we kind of know some of our strengths, some of the areas we can improve. Let's work with our students. And that's when we like could not get a single student to come to an even virtual focus group. And so we pivoted with that coding process, which did, as I say, result in the fall of 2021, new page and new assignments. And we also created a logo for ePortfolios that was directly tied to our outcomes, and an ePortfolio hub, so that students could kind of have a central space for instruction videos, sample ePortfolios, all that good stuff. And of course, that's when the sort of through line through the middle of all the saga that we've had, that's when we learned that, we might not be open again. So we kind of kept moving. We kept, we're still in the ePortfolio Institute. We're still trying to move along. So we got some enrollment data. We administered the survey again, and students were really positive, and then the instructors were really negative. But this time we had the first year seminar instructors, not the first year writing instructors. So, we're finally kind of hearing from them and hearing that they're pretty not motivated to do it, which is an issue. So, and then we started to do the sense of belonging survey, and I'll talk a lot more about that in a second. So now we're here at the end. We're under accreditation probation. We're kind of heading towards a merger. Our kind of focus now for year 3 is going to be to really try to support faculty development. So we've kind of tried to, make our way into infiltrate even, some of the courses, and we have had really low return on anybody outside of those first year courses that are sort of built into the syllabus to do ePortfolio. We really have not recruited, other than a couple of faculty people, to implement ePortfolios. So I'm going to bring this to faculty development and especially emphasize how ePortfolios are useful for outcomes assessments, which we're all being encouraged to do. I really want to promote, I separately, in my role as a writing intensive coordinator, I did an assessment on reflection, and we found such rich findings just looking at students' reflection. And so I really want to try to promote how much we're learning about students and what they know about themselves as learners through reflection. And then instead of trying to target classes, which is a super slow rollout for ePortfolio, try to look at entire curricular and co-curricular programs. So we do have a fostering student success program that is wanting to work with ePortfolios in the fall. And so we're looking for other opportunities, McNair, Scholars Program, and other places like that. So got another kind of pause here. So that's a lot of context, but I do think that it is almost, that's almost like the point at which I think that I at least am thinking through, what is going on here that's really Bloomfield, or really like the way we did ePortfolios, versus, what are some larger contextual considerations, opportunities and challenges that have kind of hit us here, that we might not be alone. I hope, I guess I don't hope, but we might not be alone, I suspect, in how these things have kind of come down and impacted us. So I'm gonna, again, look at the chat and we'll look into the Jamboard for a second. So the one I just saw, does Montclair State also do ePortfolios? Amazingly enough, we struck luck here. They do Google Sites ePortfolios. And as far as I can tell, they literally have like a website that says, here's a link to how to do an ePortfolio. So I cannot find an ePortfolio coordinator there. So, it's like my dean and I are kind of thinking, this might be something, a value added that we bring to the merger, is that we've been doing ePortfolios and assessing ePortfolios to the best of our ability. So, and it's kind of nice that they happen to also be doing Google Sites. So that's not even a big change there. So, oh, thanks for the dynamic criteria. That's awesome. All right, let me check out our Jamboard. Oh, fantastic. Oh, I'd love to see this. Can we design, so I'm looking at the Jamboard, I'm on the second page here with those justice questions from the conference. Can we design prompts and rubrics to assess mattering? And do students feel like they matter in their classes and the learning? I'm just going to ask that to others. If anybody's had a chance to see that question and maybe has a response, or if anybody is thinking about mattering. I think that's such an interesting desire to try to find a way to assess that. And if anybody has done like sense of belonging, I know Helen, you've done like the work with consulted on the high impact portfolio practices work. I don't know how you say it, but NESI, is that it?
Oh, the National Survey of Student Engagement. I mean, I think these questions about belonging, especially related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but then mattering, it seems like it's related to that. And I don't know if the person who posted that differentiates between mattering versus belonging, or how you see the nuances there.
So I can answer that. I posted that, and there's actually an article, and I'll see if I can find it, that actually has like a mattering scale. But to me, like, you can belong in a space and still be unseen, right? And unheard. Whereas when you matter, you're in the space, but you're also like, your ideas are valued, they're integrated, they're part of the system. So I'm trying to shift us at Salt Lake Community College to really thinking about mattering more than just belonging. But it's tough.
No, that's a great distinction. I mean, I'm already thinking about, the experience of like looking around a classroom and seeing other folks that look like you versus maybe being able to impact change or impact storytelling at the institution, or impact even your own, pathway through the college. So, and I'm sure mattering, I mean, thank you for that. I'm sure that there's a lot more to that as well.
Yeah, and I think that conversation is happening mostly in the student affairs space. So that's where I've found, I don't know if that's where the article you're referring to, Emily, comes from, but it seems to me that we should definitely be shifting in that direction. Because belonging almost sounds like conforming, like join the club, and rather than, what your perspective actually matters and is valued and integrated into what we're doing.
That's so helpful, Tracy. And I actually, that makes me think of, like I said, the sense of belonging survey or questionnaire we administered was from our first student intern who didn't do ePortfolio. She was a senior, but she was a first generation college student. And when she looked at the ePortfolio, she was like, I wish I had this, because it shows you all the things you need that I didn't know when I was coming in as a first year student. So, being able to see like a co-curricular page and like, what are you doing on campus? Being able to see like a college and career page and a writing my story page. So, she really, so in a sense though, I think that she was thinking about belonging, right? She was thinking about like, let's see if having any portfolio, engaging with that, is actually helping students kind of have a little bit of a map. I forget the word she used, but it was something very similar to map, so that they kind of knew what to fill in a little bit. But that's very different from mattering. And I think that's kind of like the 2.0 version of that. Like, yeah, we want students to belong. We want them to feel like their college experience gives them a map. But what does it mean, especially in institutions going through the fluxes we are, for students to matter at that time too? Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, and just one last thought on that. I think context is everything. So what matters to students at Bloomfield might, given the makeup of who they are, might be quite different than what matters to students in another context. And which isn't to say we shouldn't have crossover or be leveraging ideas from campuses that aren't like ours. I think we should, but also I think we need, like, why do students believe some things matter and not other things? And how do we help them to become, sort of really well liberally educated, so it's that they understand broad positionality, not just their own.
I would love to see a cross-institutional survey or study of that. That sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm going to check the chat in case we're on that. Thank you, Emily. Mattering empirical validation. It seems that the first step in discerning what matters to students is to ask them to engage, or to ask them and engage them in identifying ways to assess that. Oh, students in assessment. Yeah, I've learned that through my interns, that they are have incredible insights and clarity into some of the questions we might be asking, such as this sense of belonging, more agency and identity in matter. And it seems if we could find professors using critical pedagogy, that could be a way to bring prompts in that are relevant to how they organize their learning and engage with the problems that are imposed. Absolutely. Those would be excellent people to have as kind of your champions of your portfolios too. And another question on this one, can we capture transformative moments? For example, can professors model this for students by writing down transformative moments in their teaching and use them to model? And I think that the limitations of the Jamboard hit you there. Modeling 3D portfolios. I mean, that I will say that is kind of my next step for our campus is to the moment that somebody lets me work with the faculty development programming this year, we're going to do e-portfolios and kind of look at that like IRI process, inquiry, reflection, and integration from Enyen and Gambino. Thankfully, I had the book right there. But how can we capture transformative moments? So I mean, I think that whoever wrote this, that's exactly how I think about this. Like, well, how would I capture my own transformative experience? How would I make that kind of visible to myself? And reflection for me is the way that happens. And so, e-portfolios stand out to me as a way to do this, but I'm sure others of you have thoughts on this. Anybody want to chime in?
So Nora, just a quick time check.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so another in the chat was thinking about mattering and our stakeholders broadly, so that our creditors and others value approaches that center diversity, equity, inclusion, and
so Nora, another quick question, as we kind of near the end of our time. So a question about if you might quickly review some of the data you collected and highlight the anomalies. I don't know if that came from Cynthia. I don't know if that's a long answer or a short answer, but
no problem. Yeah, so I'll just show you a little bit about what we found. So we found, curiously, again, some of this is just the way that we're able to collect this, but there is no statistical difference between attempting or completing an e-portfolio. So if you put your name on the e-portfolio versus engage with it for 3 courses over their first year, we cannot tell, at least, but there is no difference in whether you are going to continue to be enrolled in the campus. So that is scratching our head a little bit. So we also then found this enormous increase in the likelihood of being enrolled for that same group of students, or for the students who either attempted or completed their e-portfolio versus the students who never attempted it. So our second year, and I'll show you those numbers in a second, just like very strange increase in that. And then kind of in that same set of enrollment numbers, we were lower than our college's 11-year average for 1-year retention in our first year with our e-portfolio students. And then in our second year, we were higher. So obviously some of this is just having 2 years of data. There's no trend yet, but we are still kind of like, there's definitely no trend yet. So here we are with our first year. And so our college is averaging from fall to fall, 66% retention rate. And so for our students who completed or attempted an e-portfolio, for which we have the enrollment data, that's 162. So we've got, only 55% of the students who did the e-portfolio in some capacity that are still at the college. So that's low for our first year. Then our second year, we jump up to 90%. Which is a different measure because we're looking at 1 semester, so from fall to spring retention rate, but the college's average is 84%. And so we're up at 90%. And then with the students who completed or attempted an e-portfolio. So we're, okay, good, like that looks good on paper, but we're still kind of like, it's in that category of wacky for us right now, and sort of to be determined. I'll also talk through this. This is the last little set of wacky findings. Our sense of belonging survey, we found a reversal in our trend from year 1 to year 2. So in year 1, we were not surprised to see that our first generation college student respondents expressed more negative sense of belonging. And then compared to first generation college students, and that was the opposite, and a very strong opposite in year 2. Suddenly in year 2, our first generation students are expecting a much higher sense of belonging than our non-first generation students. So we're, again, 2 years of data, not enough to say a trend, but it's scratching our heads. And then similarly, first year students were more positive than non-first year students in year 1. Made sense. If you're in a first year class and you're not a first year student, you're repeating the course, probably not feeling that strong sense of belonging. But then that reversed in year 2. And suddenly our first year students are not as positive as our non-first year students. And then we also kind of can look at the questions that were related to school, classrooms, and teachers, and that switched as well. So the school was the most positive in their first year, which was a remote year, and then teachers became most positive in our second year. We also found no statistical difference between if you did an e-portfolio or not. Really small sample size for all of these, but that's already kind of like, okay. The largest differences were if you were a first generation college student, you had a very high sense of belonging, partly because of our second year data. And then also we were excited to see this, participating in the spring symposium was correlated with a much higher sense of belonging. So things like gender, things like first year versus second year, much smaller impact on student sense of belonging than, in our case, first generation and participating in that symposium. So that's kind of where we've been left sort of scratching our heads. So I'll just put up my last slide, but I do want to thank the AAC and U Institute. We had no idea we were going to go through all of this when we got into the institute, but we're still here, we're still kicking, and as long as Montclair State will have us, we're going to keep, just be cheesy, writing our own story. So I'll stop there because I know my clock is slow for how long I've had my computer open. And Helen, feel free to tell us what to do next.
Great. Thank you so much, Nora. That was really, wow. That's all I have to say is wow, in terms of all that you have, all that you've encountered and had to address, and the challenges, and as well as the opportunities. We're so grateful that you were able to join us to share your story, here today. So I've been keeping track of both the chat as well as the resources that were shared. Emily, thank you so much for that article. So that will certainly go into our ABLE program resources, as well as there will be a recording of the session as well. So thank you so much. I think you have a little bit of a break before we start the student panel, which will start in about 10 minutes. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.